Welcome back. This will be the final video in our coverage of Chapter 6, Cognitive Dissonance. And in this video, we're going to be looking at Learning Objective 6.3, where we're summarizing ways to, overcome dissonance, and then finish up with a discussion of the advantages and disadvantages of having extremely high self-esteem. Dissonance is related to self-esteem, obviously. We've spent the entirety of this chapter really talking about how dissonance is connected to threats to our self-esteem. In your author's descriptions of the Heaven's Gate situation, where you had, people who were engaged in a cult situation, you could ask yourself, how can smart people allow themselves to be led in this way and then engage in this behavior of mass suicide? How can smart people fall victim to that? And your authors go on to say, one of the most powerful forces that can get people enmeshed in cult kind of situations is the degree to which cognitive dissonance is used to alter their thinking and behavior, to justify what they're doing, what they're giving up, to justify their obedience to the group. When individuals make a very important decision, like divesting themselves of all their worldly goods, giving all of their money to the group that they belong to, this cult kind of situation, they've made an important decision and they have invested heavily in that decision. So in terms of their time, their lifestyle, sacrifice, commitment, the result is dissonance. You have to justify why you've done this. You have to find a way to explain it. And what's been found in a lot of research on people who have gotten out of cults is the dissonance induction tactics that have been used extensively to dig people in so that they find it extraordinarily hard to go back on those decisions that they have invested in so heavily, because they have to reduce the dissonance of saying, I made this choice and it was really stupid and really dangerous, but they did it willingly. That causes a boatload of dissonance. So what do? You say, okay, I'm doing this for really good reasons. And you'll come up with lots and lots of justification. So people who have survived cults often talk about how mentally they manipulated their own opinions of the cult to make it more rosy, to de-emphasize the negative things like the bullying and abuse, to overemphasize the positive things, the value of the religious commitment or whatever. And that was particularly true for Heaven's Gate. So that's one of these big impacts, and it shows us just by example how important it can be for individuals to be able to override their dissonance. Like in the last video, I was describing how I had this close friendship with a person who was just super smart and better at doing statistics than me. And I decided, how do I overcome dissonance with this situation? I decided the friendship was far more valuable than me feeling bad about sucking at doing math. And I was able to reduce the dissonance by reminding myself of the importance of the relationship. There are lots of ways that we can overcome dissonance. So part of what needs to happen when you're working yourself in the direction of reducing your vulnerability to dissonance effects is to remind yourself that this process of self-justification is often unconscious. So you have to really teach yourself to understand just how vulnerable you are to justifying your actions. So if you want to overcome dissonance effects, what you have to do is catch the thoughts when they're still flying actively in your head. So in this situation where I was jealous of my friend, and basically my self-esteem says, you shouldn't be jealous of someone you really care about and likes that much. Jealousy is a negative emotion and reflects badly on you. So I catch myself sort of trying to justify why I feel this way. Now I could if I'm not thinking about it consciously, I could start to devalue my friendship or devalue the person in response to the dissonance. Instead, in order to overcome it, I catch the thought, monitor it, and, as your authors say, catch yourself in the act, examine the behavior critically, and think about what you stand to lose in terms of interpersonal relationships, for example, or in the Heaven's Gate example, your life is what you could lose. Then you can become more cognizant, more aware, more clued in to the fact that you are suffering from a dissonance effect. And just doing that reduces dissonance effects very strongly. Reminding yourself also of the dangerous quality of dissonance reducing behaviors is helpful, because sometimes engaging in dissonance reducing behaviors will protect your self-esteem, but it would also protect you from learning from your mistakes and changing your behavior long term for the good. If you spend all of your time defending your ego, learning from your mistakes becomes super hard. Now, you probably know people who do this a lot. They make the same kinds of relationship mistakes. They make the same kinds of decision-making mistakes over and over and over again. And they spend a lot of time justifying why they did what they did, putting blame on other people, putting blame on situations, putting blame on temporary factors, instead of saying, you know what, that was a mistake. I own it. I'm not going to do it again. So you're investing a whole lot of time and energy in ego protection, but you're not changing your behavior, and therefore you continue to make bad decisions and endorse incorrect beliefs over time. So that can be dangerous. You won't learn to fix your behavior. You won't correct your missing mistaken beliefs and so on. And that kind of entrenchment can lead you to keep doing the same things over and over again instead of moving yourself forward. Another danger of dissonance reduction is enhancing narcissism. So one group of people who is particularly challenged in the area of recognizing when they're doing dissonance work to protect their egos is people who are narcissistic. In personality psychology, narcissism is described as excessive self-focus and excessive self-love, and also a diminishment of feeling empathy in the direction of others. But it's really about, you're focused on you, things that happen to you, things that impact you. You're not really concerned about what happens to other people. High self-esteem, when you're engaging in sort of narcissistic thoughts, let's take a step back and think about, what does self-esteem protect us from? It protects us from thoughts about things like our vulnerability, up to and including our own mortality. And there's a theory connected to this called terror management theory. The assumption is that when we are reminded that we're mortals, that we're eventually all going to die, and eventually bad things are going to happen to everyone, mistakes are made, and so on. We should be motivated to look that in the face. But what happens is it arouses dissonance. When we are reminded of our vulnerability, it often says, you're not smart enough to protect yourself from all the things that might happen. When people are asked, to think in cold, hard terms, what is your risk of getting cancer at some point in your life and getting really, really sick? Terror management theory predicts you're going to start saying, yeah, but I do this and this and this and this to protect myself. Therefore, it is within my control to keep the cancer away. And in fact, when you point out to them, here's this other person, they have cancer, and your first thought in your head is, what did they do to get it? Why do we make judgments like that? it's to protect ourselves from the sense that we in fact are vulnerable to bad things happening for no reason. We don't like it. Now, narcissists actually aren't vulnerable to that. They feel like they're pretty invulnerable to all kinds of negative things that might happen. So what we tend to see in research on narcissism is that people who score high on narcissism indexes, so a paper and pencil measure, tend not to do as well in school. They tend to have problems in work. They tend to engage in more aggressiveness and violence. They tend not to be liked, and so on. And part of what's happening is that they don't experience the normal feedback loop that the rest of us do when we engage in negative behaviors. So let's say you have someone who scores real high on narcissism and they do poorly on an exam in school. Since they are high in narcissism, their likely explanation is that the teacher's unfair, the test was too hard, and I'm still super smart, the test just doesn't measure it, right? So they're going to be using self-justification to explain away their poor performance instead of changing their studying behaviors, changing behaviors that could ensure their success. They explain it away as not being their responsibility, and that supports their current narcissistic state. Now, some research has argued that narcissism has been on the increase. A lot of that research comes from the earlier in the 2000s. I haven't looked at this research literature recently, but the rates are probably holding pretty steady. It remains to be seen how narcissism rates are going to change post-COVID. So it'll be interesting to track that research going forward. The healthiest combination is feeling reasonably good about yourself, but still being able to learn from your mistakes and to look out for and be empathetic toward other people. And that can be challenging for people to do when their levels of narcissism are very high. Now, I'll conclude by saying, if you score high on a narcissism test, on a survey, it's not a done deal. People can choose to engage in therapy and work to change their perspectives. So there are therapeutic techniques that are designed to reduce narcissism and its negative effects and to increase empathy and care and the ability to be more resilient in the face of mistakes. So that concludes my coverage of Chapter 6.